Welcome to the 10th training video for Matrix Games World in Flames. My name is Stephen Hokinson. This training video covers naval movement. However, I'm going to start by going through the various forms that you can use to review your naval units. But first, let's get a look at where we are in the game. This is the Commonwealth Naval Movement phase. They are in the 11th impulse of the September-October 1940 turn. Because it's a naval action that the Commonwealth took, they have an unlimited number of naval moves. The first form that I want to show you for reviewing naval units is the units in Hex Form. I can bring that up by using the Control H key. The units in Hex Form can be positioned anywhere you want to on the screen, and then when you pass the cursor over a sea area, such in this case the Bay of Biscay, it shows you the units in the sea area. When I move it over to the North Sea, it shows you the units in the North Sea. And as you can tell by the checkboxes, both the Axis and the Allied players are being shown, and also all the sections of the sea box. These filters can be used to limit what you actually see in the units in Hex Form. If you go over a port, such as here, Plymouth, you'll see that there are a lot of units. This form has the same capabilities as the setup tray in that it can be expanded horizontally. That enables you to go over a form like Plymouth, where there's 52 units, and see a lot of them. The units in Hex Form is sensitive to the space bar. If you click on the space bar, it locks the units in Hex Form, as shown by the little lock symbol here. That enables me to move the cursor around the map without changing which hex is being viewed. And the units in Hex Form tells you at the top that it's Plymouth that is being reviewed here. So this lets me go down and move the scroll bar and see all the rest of the units that are in Plymouth and go back and forth. If I press the space bar a second time, it becomes unlocked. So now if I go over Plymouth, I see the units in Plymouth, but as soon as I move into the Bay of Biscay, I see the units there. So let's go back to Plymouth, which has a lot of units in it. I'll lock the space bar. And now I want to show you the unit data panel that is part of the main form. This is telling you information about the units that are in the units in Hex panel. So the land attack and land defense, land bombardment, land movement looks like a 7-3 unit. And sure enough, down here we've got a 7-3. It's also going to tell you the air attack and air defense and air attack on naval units, the tactical factors, and also the range for the units. So if we come down here, we'll see that there are 2 air units. There's a Spitfire and a Hurricane. And there are 6 and 4 air-to-air combat, plus there's a number of carrier air units. So when you look at the air unit counts for Plymouth, the summary information is giving you all the planes and also all the ships over on the right. The main disadvantage of this form is that the units are size 4. They do tell you what the status symbol are for each unit, which is useful. So you can see that all the naval units can move during the naval movement phase, but that the land units and air units cannot. The naval units that are transporting other units can move. So the carriers that are carrying carrier air units are going to be able to move the carrier air units. But the carrier air units cannot move independently. Let me close this form, and I'll go back to using one that you've seen a lot, which is the flyouts. The flyouts can also be used for reviewing naval units. So if you double click on a land hex, which is what I just did, you can go through all the land units and see what is in each hex. If you go over a port like Bristol, it'll show you the ships that are in the port. And up here in Cardiff, you can see that there's 3 land units and 2 transports, which are all set ready to carry the land units out of Bristol and take them somewhere else. The trouble with the flyouts form for reviewing naval units is not the size of the unit images. Those are zoom 6 and quite easy to read. The problem is that you only get 9 at a time. And if you want to see all 52, you have to click on the upper part here to see the second 9, and the third, and the fourth, and the 5th, and then you finally get the last group. If you continue on, you can get back to the beginning. You can also do the 52 in reverse by clicking on the small line at the bottom. The flyouts show you the status indicators for each one of the units in the hex, which is useful. So long as there's only a few units in a hex, the flyouts are fine for reviewing naval units. And a lot of the time that's going to be sufficient for, say, the Germans, because in this case they have only 8 units in the hex, 1 land unit, and 7 naval units. The flyouts also work for reviewing units within a sea area. You're doing it one section at a time here, so you can see what's in Section 4 for the Germans, Section 3, and what the Allies have in Section 4. If we go over and look at, say, Faroes Gap, we can see that there's 2 submarines here, a 3rd one here, and the convoys, 17 strength points of convoys, are being supported by 3 cruisers, 2 light and 1 heavy cruiser. If we go down to the Bay of Biscay, we can see that there are just 2 naval units currently sitting in the Bay of Biscay, one of which is an amphibious unit capable of carrying land and air units. Because naval units have so many ships in ports, and that comes up an awful lot, what we've done is designed a special form just for reviewing naval units, and we've cleverly named it the Naval Unit Details. To activate that form, you double-click on any all-sea hex. This is similar to the flyouts. The flyouts, you double-click on an empty land hex, and it brings up the flyouts. If you double-click on an empty all-sea hex, then it brings up the Naval Review Details. And this lets you look at the naval units in a port with them sorted for you by carriers, battleships, cruisers, transports, and subs. Like the space bar for the units in hex form, if you left-click on a port while the units in detail are available, it locks the form. So you can now see each individual one of these units, and there is a special unit data panel for this form. So you can look at the Baffin here, the Gladiator here, the 2 swordfish, another swordfish, another one. You can look at the illustrious Ark Royal and see all the carriers, which have carrier air units aboard. This entire column is just battleships, and battleships are pretty important when you're doing naval moves, so they get their own column. The cruisers contain 3 types of cruisers. As you can see here, there's some light cruisers at the top and a heavy cruiser. CA is heavy. The 4th column here are transports and subs, and it also includes air and land units. You can use this form for loading air units and land units onto transports. I'll do that later. The idea here, though, is that you can look at your carriers, your battleships, your cruisers, and the various transports and subs on one page. Right now we're looking at them at zoom level 4, but we're not getting any of the information that goes with them. If I click on the radio button called Status, I now get the status indicators, but the size of the units has gone down. Instead of being size 5, they're now size 4, a little bit harder to read, but you can see what the status is. And if you click on Section, you now get a zoom level 5, but you have a little extra spacing underneath them for showing what the sea area is. Now these guys are all in port, so their sea area doesn't show. But when the target for this form is a sea area, you'll see the section numbers for each one of the units. And the last one of these radio buttons up here is S&S, which gives you both status and section. So you get zoom level 4 with status indicators and extra spacing in between to show the section numbers. I'll go back to radio button None. You also can filter by whether you're looking at your own units, in this case the Commonwealth's, or all the Allied and Axis and subs. These are important when you're looking at sea areas. And again, the section numbers. But in order to look at sea areas, what I want to do is bring up the Naval Summary. Now the Naval Summary is a companion piece for this. The Naval Summary is a companion piece for the Naval Details form. What it lets you see here are all the ports that have British ships in them. Ports go up and down here. So this is Scapa Flow, and then the next one has its label above Belfast. Cardiff is below Bristol. So you see 4 ports, 2 major, 2 minor, 2 more major, a minor, a major, the location, and you get summary statistics on what units are there. So Scapa Flow has 3 ships, Belfast 1, Cardiff 2, Bristol 2, Plymouth, which we are looking at, has 43 ships. There are 52 units, but only 43 of them are naval units. Halifax has 6, Dubrovnik has 2, and Gibraltar has 23. Down here at the bottom, we have the same information for sea areas. And again, the labels go up and down for each column. So this column is the North Sea, the second column is Eastern Med, third column Western Med, Bay of Biscay, and so on. The information for sea boxes tells you which sections are occupied. So the North Sea has units in both the third and the fourth sea boxes. The Eastern Med, they're all in the 0, which probably means they're convoys. The Western Med has box 0. Bay of Biscay only has units in the first section. Faroes Gap has units in the 0, the 2, and the 3, and so on. So let's go back up to this top one, which are showing ports. It shows you how many carriers in each port, and you can see that they're all empty except for Plymouth, where there are 4 carriers. The 5 indicates that there's 5 carrier air units on those 4 carriers. Battleships, there's none except for Plymouth, which has 12, and Gibraltar, which has 3. Heavy cruisers, most of those are sitting out in Gibraltar, 11 of them. Light cruisers are mostly in Plymouth, though there's a couple in other areas. The subs are few and far between. There's 1 in Scapa Flow and there's 2 in Gibraltar, and so on down here. You can see all the convoys sitting out in Gibraltar. You have what the movements are for these various units, the range, and these are maximums. You have the air-to-sea factors, air-to-air factors, the surface factors, and Plymouth has 110 surface factors, which comes from almost entirely from those 12 battleships, though I'm sure the light cruisers contribute their part. The average defensive numbers, what the bombardment points are, and Plymouth again is capable of doing heavy bombardment in support of land attacks, anti-aircraft points, and anti-submarine warfare. Similar information is shown for the sea areas. The ship's profile is how many ships there are. That's useful when you're in naval combat. It shows you how big a target you are for the enemy to shoot at. What's especially nice about this form is that as you click on one, well, let's say Cardiff. If I click on Cardiff, then the Naval Review Details form shows me exactly what's in Cardiff. So if I want to know what's in Dubrovnik, I click on that port, and it shows me there's a couple of Yugoslavian units sitting over there. If I want to do a better understanding of what's in Gibraltar, I click on that, and there are the 14 convoy points, and it's mostly light cruisers, and I can see the individual ones. I can do the same thing for sea areas. So if I click on North Sea, I find out that there's just 1 Nav Air. If I click on the Eastern Med, I've got a convoy. Western Med is a convoy. Bay of Biscay has an amphibious unit and a Perth, which is a light ship. Now here, let me go and insert the section numbers because we're looking at sea areas. They're in the section box 1. In Faroes Gap, if I click there, I'll see that I have the convoys in 0 box, and also the convoy escorts are in the 0 box. At this point, why don't I, instead of just looking at mine, I also bring in the Axis and any other allied units. Now when I'm looking at the sea areas, I actually see what the competition is, that our Nav Air is going to be able to attack these ships, and that there's no fighter currently sitting out in the North Sea to defend the ships. So what the summary form lets you do is show you all the sea areas where there are ships, all the ports where there are ships, and it lets you go through them. Because I changed this to Axis and Allied, I now have different groups up here. I now have Murmansk, which shows the Russians. I have Leningrad for Russians, and I also have Kiel, which is going to show me the German ships. If I'm looking at ports, well, I'll just have it with nothing so I can see more units at a time. See what's in Stettin. Most of the German convoys are in Stettin. The limitations on this form is that there's only 8 ports and there are only 8 sea areas. To get around that, we have some keys over here which say next and last and previous and first. Usually you want to start with the rightmost column, like Bristol, and then you say next, and it takes you to Plymouth. You can continue on and see what's in Rotterdam, what's in Berdiansk, Sevastopol, which is easier to pronounce than Berdiansk, Halifax, La Spezia, and so on. If you're just looking at enemy ships, Then the groupings up here: Kiel, Stettin, Rotterdam, La Spezia, Taranto, Cagliari, Hiroshima, Kobe. So this is very convenient for going through and looking at all the ones that you want to see. Oops, let's go back and look at that. Fukuoka has an awful lot of units. And the same thing applies to the sea areas. So if I'm just looking at Axis units that are at sea, I look at the North Sea, Eastern Med, Western Med, Italian Coast, Baltic, Faroes Gap, Red Sea, China Sea. And now in order to see more than just 8, I use Next, and I'm going through the rest of the sea areas where there are Axis units. When using this form, you have the ability to establish a list of ports that you want to keep looking at every turn, and a list of sea areas that you want to keep every turn. And you can use displays over here to save your set of sea areas and set of ports. So the Commonwealth might want to save a list of all of the sea areas that are in the North Atlantic. They might want to keep a list of all of the ports where the Germans have units, in particular subs, that might come out and attack their convoys. So the Commonwealth might have a display called North Atlantic, which shows the sea areas that they're using to get resources from the United States and Canada over into England, and at the same time keep an eye on all of the German units which might come out and attack them. So the Naval Review Details form is for looking at an individual sea area or an individual port and checking out what the units are. You can also use it for moving units. Another form that is used frequently for keeping track of naval units is the global map. I'll bring that up with a Control-G, and I'll expand it so that we can see the entire world. And I'll also set it up to show me the Commonwealth units. And as you can see, there's a convoy going from Alaska over to Mexico. Actually, it's probably coming in somewhere in northern Mexico, and using a rail link so that a resource in Australia can come in and go up to a factory in Canada. These are the other sea areas that are in current use by the Commonwealth. The numbers within each sea area indicate how many units of each type are in the sea area. In addition to being able to look at the entire global map here with it zoomed out, you can zoom in to double its size. And this will give you a better picture, and I can also expand this larger now. You still don't get the entire world because we don't have enough room on this small monitor that I'm using, but it does give you the name of all the sea areas. The numbers are generally indicating convoys, so if there's just one number, it's the convoys. When there's more than that, it's showing you escorts, and if you can get all the way up to 4, it's showing you the naval air units that are there. Again, this is just showing Commonwealth units. You can change this to show the German units to their present, and what you're seeing here are the subs. 2 subs, 3 subs. No subs here, but there's a naval air, and there are 3 convoys in the Baltic. Okay, so let's look at actually moving some units. I'll use flyouts as the first example. I'll go here to Cardiff, and I'll take a transport, and I'll move the transport into the Bay of Biscay. If you'll notice that the cursor is now showing me a 3. The target is a cursor, meaning that it's a valid destination. And the 3 indicates that this unit could go as high as the 3 section in this area. So when I click on the sea area, it brings up a form asking me which section I would like to have this unit stop in. On the left are the moving units, just the transport, and these are the units already in the area. Down at the bottom, I can click on any of these section boxes, 0, 1, 2, 3. I'm not able to click on 4 because it doesn't have enough movement points to go there. The calculation of the number of movement points that the unit has is based upon the top number in the center, which is the 4. The bottom number in the center is the range. The range means how many sea areas it can traverse. In this case, it's only going 1. It's coming out of Cardiff and going into the Bay of Biscay. The 4 indicates how many movement points it has available. It expends 1 movement point to move from Cardiff into the Bay of Biscay. That leaves it with 3 more movement points, and that means that it can go as high as the 3rd section box. If it didn't have any movement points left, it would have to go into the section 0 box. I'm going to cancel this move, put the unit back in Cardiff by pressing the escape key. As one more example of using this flyouts, I'll pick up both the Manchester heavy cruiser and the Achilles light cruiser, drop them into the Bay of Biscay. They both have 6 movement points, and so therefore they can go as high as Section 4. And I'll do that. I'll say Section 4 and I'll say OK. And when I go to look at the Bay of Biscay, I see that these two units are sitting out there. I can undo these moves by doing a right click on the unit, click on Undo, and the Manchester is now returned to Bristol. I go back to the Bay of Biscay and do an undo on the Achilles. It also goes back, and now I have both of those ships back where they started. But the flyouts isn't very good when you're working with a lot of ships. So what I want to show you is the Select Units form, and that's done by doing a Control left click on a port. The Select Units form shows an awful lot of ships all at once. And at the top it has filters. And the filters let you eliminate some units from the selected units here. So for instance, if I want to pick out a fleet that can go pretty far, say I want it to move 3 sea areas away from where it starts at Plymouth, I unclicked range 2, and now I've reduced the number of units that are available. If I now say that I not only want to move 3 sea areas, but I want to have at least 2 movement points left over, then I'm going to need 5 and 6 movement points for my ships. So I'll unclick 4 and I'll unclick 3, and now I have those units which are capable of moving 5 or 6 movement points with a range of 3 or more. Those have all already been selected, so I can just say OK, and now I can move them 3 sea areas. To do that, let me bring up the global map again. So we're starting out here. What I'd like to do is bring them out to the North Atlantic and have them combat these submarines and the other unit that's sitting here. So I click on that sea area, and it tells me what's currently there, which are some submarines, but also the Graf Spee, which is a nasty unit to have attack my poor little convoys. So what I'll do is I'll move them into the North Sea, and this gives the German player the opportunity to intercept or not intercept. The German player is not particularly interested in having his submarines and Graf Spee attack these carriers, so he'll say do not intercept. And what that does is that brings us back to, do you want to keep moving or do you want to stop here? In this case I'll have the entire stack stop in the sea area, which is down here. Do I want to keep moving? No. Stop in sea area. And at this point it's asking me which section, and I want the highest section I can get, which is 3. So I say OK. And if we go back to the North Atlantic, we can see all the naval units that have just arrived, using the flyouts or using the Naval Review details. One of the easiest ways of moving units with naval transports is to use the Naval Review details form. I'll double click on an All-Sea hex to bring up the Naval Review's detail form, and then go over here to Cardiff to look at the units that could be transported. Cardiff has 2 transports. It has a headquarters and has a couple divisional units, an artillery and an aircraft gun. You just simply click on whichever unit you want to transport. So when I click on Gort, the headquarters unit Gort is appearing at the top of the screen. When I click on the transport, Gort is loaded onto it. I can do the same thing with the artillery unit. I click on the other transport, which is empty, and now the divisional artillery unit is aboard the transport. Now what's happened here is that the transport with the divisional unit is only half loaded. I can add the other divisional unit to it. So I click on the second divisional, the anti-aircraft unit, and now when I click on the half-loaded transport, both divisional units are now aboard the transport that's number 4721. Gort, on the other hand, is aboard the transport that's numbered 4720. These units are now capable of being moved via naval movement. I'll just select the 2 transports and I'll move them into Liverpool. What's actually happening is the transports are going from Cardiff into the Bay of Biscay and then into Liverpool. 1 movement point, 2 movement points. It also uses 2 range. When I land in Liverpool, the units are all unloaded there, so that now Gort and the divisional artillery and anti-aircraft gun are separated from the transports. Let me show you what these units look like using the flyouts now. So I double click on an empty land hex to have the Naval Review details form leave, and now the flyouts form comes up. You'll see that Gort still is a headquarters and he's done moving. Also the 2 other land units are done moving, The transports are disorganized. That's because they've completed their move. They won't be available to move again until the next turn unless somebody comes along and reorganizes them. Gort, for instance, could use his 2 reorganization points to reorganize the transports. But if he doesn't do that, the next time the land units are moving for the Commonwealth, Gort and the 2 divisional units will be available for moving. Let me make that clear. If the land units or air units are transported from a port directly to a second port, then the land units or air units are capable of performing missions in the rest of the impulse and the rest of the turn. I'll give you an example later where that's not going to be true because the units are not being moved from one port directly to a second port. For a second example of how naval transports can be used to pick up and move other units as cargo, I'll use the 2 transports that are in Plymouth. Again, I'll use the Naval Review's details form for that. I'll bring it up and you'll see that there are 2 transports out here. Now they could pick up the air units and this 7-3, but instead I'm just going to take the transports by themselves and move them into the Bay of Biscay. In the Bay of Biscay, I'm being asked what section box I would like to place these units in. But first, what I want to do is have the transports pick up cargo from a coastal hex. So I select the first transport, I say load from coastal hex, and here are all the units that they could pick up. So I can pick up the 6-4, say OK, and now I have the 6-4 is loaded on the transport 4722. The transport 4722 is saying that it's loaded with the 3rd Infantry Corps. And I can use the second transport, do another load from coastal hex, and I could pick up the Spitfire. And now that I've picked up the Spitfire, both of the transports are loaded with units. I can put those in the section 3 box and say OK. And when I look at the Bay of Biscay, I now see that the transports are currently carrying the Spitfire and the infantry. In a subsequent turn, I can take these 2 units and move the transports into another port, or I can directly unload these units into a coastal hex that is adjacent to the Bay of Biscay. For the third and last example of using naval units to transport other units, I want to go out and pick up this amphibious unit which starts at sea, and I'm going to move him into Plymouth, and I'm going to use Control left click in order to move him into Plymouth. The Control left click means that I still want to continue moving the unit, and I'm just stopping in Plymouth temporarily. One of the uses for this form is to drop units off. That's not what I want to do here. Instead, I'm going to come down and click on Load Unit. And there's a 7-3 sitting in Plymouth that I'm going to have the amphibious unit load. And I'll say, OK, no units being dropped off. The amphibious unit is still moving. He goes back out to the Bay of Biscay, and now I can drop him in Belfast. This is the 7-3 and also the amphibious unit carrying the 7-3. So when I go up and use flyouts, you can see that both the units are now in Belfast. The amphibious unit is disorganized because it's completed its move. And because the infantry unit was picked up en route, he is also disorganized when he reaches his destination. That concludes my 3 examples for moving units via naval transports. I want to do one more example of moving into an enemy sea area. And to do that, I'm going to take a couple units out of Scapa Flow, these light cruisers, and move them into the Faroes Gap. At this point, the German submarines have the option of deciding whether they want to try to intercept or not. And because the submarines are quite capable of attacking the 2 light cruisers, they'll say yes, they do want to intercept, and one of them has to be designated as the interception unit. This is the unit that's initiating the combat. I'll take the unit in the lower sea box, the submarine, and just say OK, and now I'm going to force the interception to be successful by having the interception die roll be a 2, which generates the message that the Commonwealth units in the Faroes Gap were intercepted by the Germans with a die roll of 2. At this point, the moving units, the 2 light cruisers that I had enter the Faroes Gap, can decide whether they want to stop or fight through. I'm going to have them just stop. If they tried to fight through, there would actually be a naval combat. And the next training video is going to discuss naval combats and give you some examples of that. But for right now, they're just going to say, no, we're not going to fight through, we're just going to stop. And when they do that, they get to choose their sea box, just like any other naval move. And I'm going to put them in the highest box possible, the section 4 box. So now when I go and look at the Faroes Gap, I've got the 2 light cruisers in the high box. I still have I still have the units that started the phase in the 0 box, which are 3 cruisers, 2 light, 1 heavy, and 17 points of convoys. This concludes training video 10, the purpose of which was to show you the various forms for examining the naval units that are on the map, and also for how you can select them for movement, how you can load them with cargo and move the cargo to another destination, and also how you can enter sea areas controlled by enemy units, be intercepted, and possibly go on into combat.